Well, welcome back. This is almost our last session together, and we want to talk about maybe one of the most important parts of the whole lesson and the whole curriculum that you are beginning to be prepared for as teachers. The Bible content in the interactive reading is designed to accomplish several things. First of all, it will help your students learn how to read the English and use the rhythm and stress that will also help them in oral speaking. The Bible stories are in a chronological format, beginning with Genesis and ending up in the New Testament, in the life and the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the coming of the Holy Spirit. And it's designed to tell a redemptive story, so that as your students are reading it, if they're interested, and let me just say that even to this day, the Bible is the most desired book for people to learn how to read and understand. So as your students are interacting with the biblical material, we want to again continue discussing and getting acquainted with our students. And hopefully they will begin to understand some of the background and theology and whatever regarding our Christian faith and your particular Christian faith. So we hope that this simplified story of the Bible as we work through the books will help you in discussing and interacting with your students. Let me just say that the biblical material in Book 1 is all in the present tense, so it will not confuse or make frustration your students as they try to understand the change of verb forms and whatever. And then Book 3, the future tense, then we include all the verb forms in the scriptures as it's being recorded, so that they're able to interact with all verb tense forms. Okay, now turn in your book to How to Teach a Lesson, and we're going to look at Roman numeral 9, Interactive Reading Skills. And there are 3 parts to it, and let's go over that right now and how you would deal with your students. Now remember, just like in the things to think about and the reading section in the lesson, you will come alongside or you will work with maybe several students. If you have a large class and you have 2 or 3 teachers working together, then what you can do is you can break off small groups, and each teacher can work with the smaller group and have more of a one-on-one relationship in discussion as well as learning how to read. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you how you would deal with a beginning level student, and then I'll mention what do you do with a higher level students that you might have in your class. Now, as you will read in your book, the first thing that you need to do is that you will take maybe one line. This is the first 4 lines of the first story on the creation. And so there are some words obviously in the lessons that are not in lesson 1, and you'll find that as you turn the page over to the end of the Bible story, there are new words that I included so that they will understand the power and the nuance of the biblical story. So we don't make it so flat and elementary that they don't really understand what is going on. So don't be afraid to, as you go line by line or paragraph by paragraph, to be able to go to those new words and to explain it and role play it or whatever you need to do to be able to communicate to your students what's happening in the scriptures. Now, the first thing that you do, if you have a beginning level student, is that you don't want to ask them to read the whole thing. That's impossible, so don't even begin to do that. In your class, you may want to take over half the time in a class session just to move through a couple or several lines, or maybe a paragraph, or however fast they're able to interact with the material, understanding it as well as reading it. And if they have a hard time, then you're going to help them, you're going to encourage them, and correct them by modeling correctly and help them with the rhythm and cadence and the stress points, and it will take much more time. Okay, so do not be in a hurry because this is the most important of the whole lesson and the whole purpose of the curriculum, as I said before. Okay, so here's the first thing you would do. You'd be in front of your 2 or 3 students, just you, if you're breaking up into small groups, or if there's 2 of you and 5 students, your one lead teacher then would say, please listen, or you might stand beside them and move your hand across the first line. You'd say, first, God makes the heavens and the earth. Okay, please listen. First, God makes the heavens and the earth. And then you would ask them, please read along with me. And so they would read along with you simultaneously. First, God makes the heavens and the earth. Now, if you and a team member are working with a small group of students, then the team member who's helping you will then listen and help any student that might need strengthening their rhythm or the pronunciation. And you work together as a team, and you don't go any faster than your students are able to keep up. So first thing is, you read it twice, maybe 3 times if need be, depending on the level of your students, and their background in the Christian faith. They may have no background and understanding of what the Christian faith is about, so you don't want to read too fast and assume too much. So you read it 2 or 3 times. Then you would ask them to read 1 line. Now, if they get halfway through and begin to stumble, then you say, okay, we'll just take a part of. First, God makes the heavens. And let them just read that part. And then you'd work on the last part. And the earth. Make sure that they can get the TH sound, earth. And so then you would have them come back together and put the whole sentence together. That's a really beginning level student. And then you'd go to the next line. God says, let light shine. And light starts shining. And then you would work on the next line the same way. You would read maybe 2 lines, 2 or 3 times, and then if they're really beginning, then you might want to just take this part of the sentence and this part later, and then have them put it together so they're able to put their finger on it. Then you have them solo, and they're going to read the whole sentence. And once they do maybe 2 or 3 lines, then you say, okay, let's go back, let's start right here, and you read this line, then read this line, and then read this line. And so they're reading all the lines together. Now let me just say in literacy, and if you've ever worked in literacy, that sometimes your students are struggling so hard to pronounce the words, they're not paying attention to the meaning of the words. And that's why we have discussion questions at the end. So you don't do too much, you read it, and God says, and then here I haven't read, opposite. And that's in your new words, and you've already taught it, hopefully, by this time. And so they know the opposite of day is night, and they can understand what is happening in creation. So you work through that line by line. Now, if your students are higher level and familiar, let's say, with the Christian faith, or even if they don't come out of a Christian culture, you can take more lines. And you will just have to discover this as you begin working with your students, and as you practice with them after you turn off the tape and work with your students, you'll begin to understand where their reading level is. And then you'll be able to take more lines depending on their skill level. And if they have a higher skill level, you might ask them to read the first 5 lines or the first 10 lines or whatever their ability is. So you read it through, and then at that, the discussion question is, what does God make? What does God make? And then if they don't know the answer, instead, do not tell them the answer. Do not tell them the answer. Have them go back to the story and read it over again, even if they have to read it silently. And you know, when you read silently, a new reader, when they read silently, don't have to struggle with trying to pronounce the words because they don't think with an accent or they don't think with a problem. They don't have that problem. So when they're reading it silently, they're reading for understanding. And then you come back and say, okay, what does God make? Oh, He makes the heavens and earth. And if they need to understand what those words mean, then you have ample time to begin to show a picture or describe it. And there are pictures there in the book that will sort of show a little bit, as you can see here on the page, a little bit about what the earth is. It's our world. Well, you continue down through until you finish, and it's a short story. It's all in the present tense, so they're not struggling with different verb forms. And then there are new words, so you teach that again, and it might be good to reinforce the concept of opposites again. That might be really good. And then go to the discussion questions, spend time talking with one another about what is going on in the storyline. All right? And let them talk. If they come from a non-Christian culture with a different religious stories from their own culture, invite them to share what their culture says about creation, if there is a creation story. And interact and get acquainted with your students and find out. You may find that some students don't have any belief about creation, that it's all by mere chance. And so you want to accept that philosophy and you want to include that and say, okay, that's good. Okay, are you interested in learning more about what the Christian faith says from the Bible? And we have found that 99% of our students, rarely do we come across students, want to learn more about the dynamic of our Christian faith. So this is an opportunity for you to interact as a group and just enjoy one another. Okay, so that's what I want you to do. Take your students right now, spend about 25 minutes or so, depending on the size of your group, and go through each of the steps, read it, have them read it back, have them, if they need to point underneath, let them do that, and ask the discussion questions and interact and see what happens. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about some other things that you'll need to know as you get your ministry started. All right? We'll see you back here in about maybe 30, 40 minutes. All right?